I purchased the vehicle almost 44 years ago, several days after I graduated college actually. And I've driven it since that time, almost 300,000 miles. In fact, about 275,000 miles on the original motor. And it's been an everyday car for many years. It's been a special car to drive on weekends for many years. And in fact, for a period of time, I actually towed a boat in Arizona and enjoyed the waterways, and found it sometimes to be a little tricky with an old car with drum brakes that heated up stopping the vehicle, but nonetheless, we safely drove it in Arizona for many, many years. The day I purchased the car, I think it was the day before Christmas in 1976, and I was headed to California for business interviews, just having graduated from college. And I decided the right thing to do was to change all of the hoses on the car, even though I was not very mechanically inclined. So I started to pull all the hoses off, including the hose to the heater core. And as I sort of wrenched the thing off and pulled it and tugged it, I finally got it off and replaced it with a new one, only to learn that when I turned the car back on again, water from the radiator came flooding into the vehicle. So I had to figure out a way to bypass that heater core on my way to California. One of my favorite stories is my sister, when she was pregnant with my niece, was planning her trip to the hospital, and they were looking for a car that was big and comfortable and had nice seats and easy to get out of. So I volunteered my Cutlass, and when the time came, she and her husband jumped into the vehicle and headed for the hospital. My niece was born and everybody was well, and I said to my brother-in-law, "So where's the keys to my car?" And he goes, "Oh geez, I couldn't get the keys out of the car, so I just left it that way in the parking lot." So I, of course, raced out to the parking lot only to find he just had failed to put it in park to get the keys out, but nonetheless, everything was safe and well.
So, Ben, we're here with one of your prides and joys, and the car that sort of started it all. So tell me, what relationship does your BMW have to this Cutlass?
I think this may be the first time these two cars have been in a shot together in the history of cinematography. But this car is my father's Cutlass Supreme convertible. He's had this, forever, and I grew up with the car almost like a brother. It's been in the family, since I was born and way before that. Spent my youth kind of riding the back seat, hanging around, going to muscle car shows, and kind of learned about the scope of cars through this car. But it wasn't a collector car, it wasn't, this high performance car, but it was cool. It was different than anything else, that was kind of on the road. And you got a lot of thumbs up in it, which is always cool. As I grew older, I always had an appreciation for cars and saw stuff on the road and could always identify stuff, from a young age. But as I grew older and kind of moved out of high school and met more friends who were into cars, I started to learn more about what makes each car special within themselves. And I found I was fixated towards BMWs. My dad had actually bought a BMW in 2008. He bought a 535i, the E60 generation. And that was the first year of the N54 engine that was in the 5 Series, after it had just won Engine of the Year in the 3 Series. So my dad kind of had an understanding of it. Twin turbo inline 6, it sounded like a great platform, and it was. After, I turned 16, I drove the car a few times and loved everything about it. This is a 135i. It's a 2011 model. It has an engine that's very similar to the N54, and it's called the N55. So it has just one turbocharger, and it's a bit more efficient, but with about 300 horsepower from the factory and a car that weighs, about 3,200 pounds, it's quick enough, I would say.
And obviously you learned about what performance could be back in the day when you first got behind the wheel of this Cutlass. What was that like? Yeah,
so I think it was after baseball practice one day. The parking lot was empty. We were heading out, and I said, "Dad, do you think I could drive the Cutlass?" And he said, I guess, sure. And I got in the front seat without any, prior thinking about it. And my dad said, just put it in drive and, be careful, make sure you're ready to, hit the brake if you need to. And I put it in drive and let my foot off the brake, and the car starts moving. It's a 3-speed automatic, it's going to move. But being 14, I was shocked that the thing was kind of driving itself around the parking lot. It blew my mind, but that was my first driving experience, and I was only up from there, I guess you could say.
And people say that autonomous cars are new. You experienced it at 14 years old in a 1971 Oldsmobile Cutlass.
Yeah, and I would have maybe not trusted myself closing my eyes and falling asleep like some Tesla drivers, but it was definitely an experience, and it started to open my eyes to what driving a car felt like, even though it was the steering was a bit looser, and the whole ride was a bit softer than a normal car, but it was a fun introduction at my old baseball field.
Well, that's a very interesting question. Obviously, being into BMWs as you are, and especially this particular car, which you've modified ever so slightly, and you have driven this car a lot, both in competitive events and on the street. What was it when you began to learn what the differences were between a car like the Cutlass and the BMW? How did that affect your choices in cars?
I think it's interesting because I got into BMWs because my dad bought his E65 series. But back in '87, my dad bought new a BMW 325IS, the first year of the 325IS in the E30 generation. And that was a sporty car. He still had this car. He drove the E30 every day, right away when he bought it, and he was amazed that, in a few years, we had reached this point in, driving abilities, I guess. The car was so advanced, and it was interesting because when he drove this car for the first time, he said, basically what all the journalists had said, it reminds me of the E30. It's a balanced car, it's a short wheelbase, and with the old muscle cars from the 70s, it's usually, more power equals more better. With the BMWs, there's so much, to dive into, and the first thing I did was kind of modify the suspension as we were kind of turning it into a cross-country tourer, I guess you could say.
And it's an interesting story. Cross-country, you talked about some of the drives that you and your dad have taken in this Cutlass, which has covered almost 400,000 miles from new now. And you're not afraid to drive your BMW either. No.
I went to school at Arizona State. I studied communication out there. And you can't fly a car to Arizona. So after the car came into the family, we had already started thinking about how we were going to get to Arizona from Rhode Island and started planning trips. And we ended up, buying the set of roof racks here with a Thule roof box, stuffed the whole car. My dad and I got, the Waze going, the GPS, bought a radar detector, and we ended up doing 4 cross-country trips. We went up Pikes Peak, we flew across Texas. To be able to see the country in a car and understand that, there are places where there's nothing there. I think it's something that everybody has to experience, and to do that with my dad 4 times was totally awesome, and I wouldn't trade those memories for the world.
And the fact that it proves that for me, and I know as for you, the best experience of owning a car, whether it's an old car or a new car, is driving the car.
I absolutely agree, and this car has 125,000 miles on it as of now. I bought the car 5 years ago with 17,000 miles. So that's about 108,000 in 5 years, which is a lot of miles. But, I'm also into sneakers. I played a lot of basketball growing up. So sneakers mean a lot about, your connection to the court. It's almost like tires, on the road. It's your small connection to what's keeping you, elevated. And I have pairs of shoes that sit in the closet. What's the point? You can't wear them. And, we're in the direct sunlight now. It's kind of tough. You're putting me on the spot, but you see some stone chips here. It's that doesn't affect how the car drives. I don't enjoy the car scene, so to speak, because I enjoy looking at cars. The best part, about owning a car is, coming into a corner, flipping a heel-toe downshift, and feeling the weight, transfer and, move through the corner as the engineers designed it to do. Because I don't think they designed the car and engineered the car for it to sit like this all the time.
It's great to look at cars. Cars are wonderful as sculpture, but they're kinetic sculpture. I think they're at their highest form, and I know you agree, when you hear them, smell them, and see the sunlight passing across it. It's also a testament, again, to the fact that cars like this Cutlass, typically after 20 years of ownership, they just sit in the garage and the owner often says, I've got other cars and driving other things, why should I keep this thing? It's taking up space. What do you think made your dad keep this car today?
You know, the car has almost 300,000 miles on the chassis. You know, he's owned it in Arizona, he's owned it here. So many stories I'm sure he could tell about it, but you know, at this point, to get rid of a car that he's had for 44 years, I don't think makes much sense. I mean, the monetary value of it isn't worth, you know, the memories and everything you experienced in that car. And it's kind of the same with this. The 1 Series was produced in America from 2008 to 2013, and that was it. It's almost extinct. There have been plenty similar BMW models. The M2 is a great car. The M3's a fantastic car, but this is really the smallest modern BMW since, you know, the old E36, E46 M3s. So it's really the same with me. You know, the car's worth 10 grand or so, but you know, it competes with cars in, you know, another bracket, and you know, to get rid of it, and you know, I would just regret it. And just spending time in the museum, talking to, you know, our guests and our members, and hearing their stories. 9 out of 10 times, the story is, God, I loved this car. I wish I still had it. It's never, God, I love this car, and I've had it for 44 years. So, you know, to sell it and make some money just to find another fun car, to me, doesn't make sense.
So in other words, we can stand here 30 years from now and talk about your 300,000 mile BMW.
You know, Donald, if you wanted to film another video in 30 years, you can bet $1 that I will have this car. Whether it has the same engine, a different engine, but you will see this body here. And I will, you know, pull the insurance and put it in a barn and have it sit before I get rid of it. So you can bank on that.
The bet is on. We'll see you right here in 30 years.
Perfect.
Answer to this week's Audrain Auto Museum Fun Fast Fact Quiz question. With what manufacturer, known throughout the world for British craftsmanship and design, did Brough partner to build a new superbike? Aston Martin. The AMB 001 by Aston Martin and Brough Superior is a limited edition high-performance superbike for the track that distills all of the qualities of the great Aston Martin brand and the legendary Brough Superior brand. If you like these videos, let your friends know. Subscribe, comment, share.